to ask, bringing the conversation back to women in energy. Um, for younger women entering this space, what environment is ideal for a woman in energy?
What is an ideal environment? So the easy answer to that question is the ideal environment is an inclusive one, right? What we don't want in the inclusion conversation is for people to feel like they have been included for the sake of compliance, right? We want people to be included because the organization or the industry or the household or the whatever understands the value of the individual being included beyond compliance, right? We also want to have the conversations about what inclusion means, because in the space of having the conversation around whether it's employment equity or racial segregation and transformation or diversity and inclusion in a workplace, we always faced with a narrative that we hire the best for the job. And then people have this idea around what the best for the job looks like on paper. Maybe they went to a certain school, maybe they graduated top of their class. There's usually embedded in those kind of objective characteristics, there's typically included embedded bias, right? So for example, in South Africa, historically, the best schools in the country, the schools that were rated the best in the country, were traditionally boys' schools, right? So the embedded bias of saying we hire from the best schools infers that you only hire males. But more than that, historically, those best schools in the country were typically all boys private schools that only wealthy white people could afford. So by saying that we only hire from the best schools, you're inferring that you only hire white males that come from a privileged background, right? It's the same at university. There's certain characteristics that exclude certain types of people in the different universities, right? If UCT is only accepting kids from the best schools, they're only accepting kids that come from those historically privileged schools, which means that they have a category, or their graduates are all of that category, or a great number of their graduates are of that category that come from privileged backgrounds, right? So they're automatically excluding those students that come from underprivileged backgrounds, right? There's embedded exclusionary practices pretty much in every objective, what we think is an objective criteria for recruitment, and we need to be able to properly accept that. So we're not saying change your criteria, because everybody needs a criteria, but understand what you are doing by accepting your criteria, right? And I mean, all the examples I use are hypothetical, because we know that the different institutions are really making leaps and bounds and great strides in addressing their embedded inequality or exclusionary practices. But also the reality is the reality, right? If you come from a warm, loving home and you have a full belly every night and you have space created for you to do your homework, and your parents are able to afford that, you are going to perform better at school, and therefore you will get into university. And I mean, it's a great stereotype, but the environments that are able to afford you that warm, quiet, loving environment with exclusive space within which to study is typically a middle class, wealthy environment, right? Which means that automatically poor kids and kids that are living in poverty and in informal structures and in townships where it's noisy all the time are excluded from performing at the academic levels that they could potentially perform at if they were given or living in this kind of environment, right? And all of those things and all of those embedded factors eventually affect how they present on paper, right? Because we all know a kid who performs well under the perfect circumstances will get ahead, but a kid that performs less well but maybe above average in completely in difficult circumstances is also very likely to get ahead if they're given the opportunity. But will they ever be given the opportunity?
Seems like the inequality women face is almost webbed up with is almost webbed up with all the other problems we are facing in South Africa.
So, I mean, this is the conversation we need to have, right? Because generally across the world, there's an unequal playing field in terms of the inclusion of women and underrepresented genders in the workplace, right? The global statistics that will tell you that it'll take 137 years, or whatever the number is, for women to achieve pay parity. The global statistics will tell you that, when there's female representation on boards of directors and in leadership positions, companies perform better. The global statistics will tell you that of the top 50 companies on the New York Stock Exchange, 42 of them are led by women. Right? Those are the global statistics. In South Africa, in our exclusive context, our framing needs to be different, right? Because I don't want to say that we have a unique set of characteristics, but we do. We're very new into democracy. Exclusionary practices are embedded in society and they continue to materialize, right? The informal economy is growing whether we choose to accept it or not. So those exclusionary practices and discriminatory practices become more and more systemically embedded, right? The conversation around inclusion needs to be tailored to suit
I wanted to ask our criticism on these systems that almost support like in equality in employment, right? Do you think that means the whole system needs to be criticized, or are there only places that we need to criticize?
That's such an interesting question. So my perspective, and it's not a, I suppose, common or popular perspective, is that it's not the system's fault, right? The systems were created by humans with certain ideas and preconceptions and perceptions and by embedded biases themselves, right? Because those systems are created to serve humanity, humans, right? It's our job as humanity now to go back and question what aspects of the system is working for us and what's not. That's basically it. So it's aspects of the system, it's not the whole system. But at the same time, we can't retain an existing system and hope to achieve a different outcome, right? Because the system running the way that the system has been running has resulted in this set of outcomes. We have to change something. We need to upgrade something, You
said South Africa is very young when it comes to democracy. Does that mean, compared to other democratic countries, we have a lot more potential on what we can change and what changes we can implement? Can we implement them faster than they have? Especially since we're in an age where these conversations have been started and.
I think we have the opportunity to implement change faster than others have, because inclusion and diversity are part of the fabric of our identity as a democratic nation, right? The powers that be fought apartheid on the premise that we're all equal and that we have a rainbow nation, so it values diversity, values inclusion. That was the premise that this democracy was birthed, right? It's our destiny, almost. So I think that the promise of an inclusionary environment and the working towards achieving those levels of inclusion and maybe upgrading the system so that we are more intentional in our design around achieving inclusionary practices in the economy is more than achievable. I feel like it's predestined, but it just takes the right people in the right places with the right headspace to start making those movements, because the change is not going to happen by itself.
Based on the conversations that we've had and the topics, what does WeConnect look to give and offer in light of all this?
So the offering is quite simple. Actually, we've had a very complicated conversation. There's three sort of tiers of work that we do and hope to continue doing. The first being support for young people who are looking to enter the industry. We want to provide mechanisms to access education, access opportunities, maybe find out more about the energy sector and just create general awareness about what the opportunities are that exist. and basically create a pipeline of young women and young people entering the industry from a more intentional perspective. The second category of work is support for in-career professionals. So those women and people from underrepresented genders that already work in renewable energy or in the energy sector as a whole, provide them with opportunities to upskill or reskill or pivot into new skills. Also provide options for leadership development and mentorship and coaching so that they can further their careers within the industry. My specific motive in the support for in-career professionals category is enabling what we've called social dexterity. So understanding lots of people from lots of different diverse backgrounds join the industry. How do you enable two people or a multitude of people from fundamentally different backgrounds connect with each other on almost a social level so that they can have difficult or uncomfortable conversations, but also think of each other when opportunities show up. So enabling social dexterity. And the last category of work for us is really supporting an inclusionary renewable energy or energy value chain. So supporting entrepreneurs in the industry grow their businesses, access capital, access opportunities, upskill, get technical support. So three categories of work: support for young people, support for in-career professionals, and support for the value chain development.
Okay.